They called her the ghost of Sussex, a woman so scarred by fire and scandal that her own father hid her away in the attic like a dirty secret. Everyone whispered that Lady Isolde was mad, dangerous, broken beyond repair. She was the woman no man would look at twice, unless it was to mock her. But one night, amidst the glittering lies of a London ballroom, one man didn't see a monster. He looked past the scars and saw sheer, paralyzing terror. And when the entire world moved to crush her, the most powerful duke in England did the unthinkable. He declared her his. The rain battered against the leaded panes of Fairfax Manor, rattling the glass like a fist demanding entry. Inside the library, the air was thick with the smell of stale port and impending doom. Lady Isolde Fairfax stood in the darkest corner of the room, her spine pressed so hard against the oak wainscoting that the wood seemed to bite into her back through the thin fabric of her grey governess dress. She was 23 years old, though her eyes wide, haunted, and the colour of bruised violets held the weariness of a woman 3 times her age. She kept her head lowered, her hair pulled forward in a severe curtain to hide the left side of her face. The mark of the devil, the villagers called it, a burn scar, angry and rippled, that started at her jawline and vanished beneath her high collar, a souvenir from the nursery fire that had killed her mother 15 years ago. "Stop skulking in the shadows, girl," her father, Baron Fairfax, snapped. He was a man eroding under the weight of gambling debts, his face puffy and red. "Step into the light. Lord Gillingham wishes to see what he is purchasing." Isolde flinched. Purchasing. Seated in the oversized leather wingback chair was Lord Gillingham. He was a man of 60, with teeth that looked too small for his mouth and hands that were perpetually damp. He was known in London circles not for his wealth, though he had plenty, but for the succession of young wives who seemed to wither and die within 2 years of marrying him. "She's scrawny," Gillingham grunted, not bothering to stand. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "And they say she's mad, that she hears voices." Lies spread by jealous servants. Her stepmother, Lady Catherine, interjected smoothly from the settee. Catherine was beautiful, cold, and calculated a porcelain doll with a knife hidden in her sleeve. She smoothed her silk skirts. "Isolde is docile. She is obedient, and she comes with the Kensington inheritance once she is wed." Isolde's heart hammered against her ribs. The Kensington inheritance money, left by her maternal grandmother, that she could only access upon marriage. It was the only reason they hadn't thrown her into the asylum at Bedlam years ago. They needed a husband to unlock the vault. "Come here," Gillingham commanded. Isolde didn't move. She couldn't. Her legs felt like lead. I said, "Come here." Gillingham slammed his glass onto the table, shattering the base. Trembling, Isolde stepped forward into the circle of firelight. She kept her face turned away, but Gillingham stood up, crossing the distance with surprising speed. He grabbed her chin with a wet, clammy hand and forced her head up, turning her face so the firelight hit the scar. He hissed, recoiling slightly. "It is unsightly. It can be covered with a veil," Catherine said quickly. "And for £20,000? Gillingham, surely you can overlook a blemish. Think of the debts you could settle." Gillingham stared at the scar, then shifted his gaze to Isolde's terrified eyes. A cruel, predatory smile spread across his face. He didn't mind the scar. He liked the fear. He liked knowing she was damaged goods that no one else wanted. It meant she would have no defenders. "Fine," Gillingham said, wiping his hand on his trousers, as if he had touched something filthy. "I'll take her, but I want it done quietly. No grand wedding. I'll take her to my estate in the Highlands immediately. I'll break her in there." Isolde felt the bile rise in her throat. The Highlands. Miles from civilization. No one would hear her scream. "Excellent," her father sighed, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Sign the papers, and she is yours." "No," Isolde whispered. The word was so quiet it was almost lost to the storm outside. Her father turned, his face darkening. "What did you say?" "No," she said louder, her voice shaking but distinct. "I won't go with him. I know what he did to his last wife. The maid. She told me about the bruises." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, the Baron crossed the room and struck her. The blow knocked her to the floor, her cheek stinging, the taste of blood blooming in her mouth. "You ungrateful wretch," he screamed. "You ruined this family with your fire. You killed your mother. You will do as you are told, or by God, I will drive you to the asylum myself and leave you there to rot." Isolde lay on the Persian rug, the dust of the floor mixing with her tears. She looked up and saw Gillingham smiling down at her, rubbing his thumb over his signet ring. "Monday," Gillingham said. "Have her packed and ready by Monday. If she fights, bind her." As the men shook hands and her stepmother poured celebratory wine, Isolde realized with chilling clarity that she was going to die, unless she ran. But there was nowhere to run. She had no money, no friends, and a face that made children scream. She was the ghost of Fairfax Manor, and soon she would just be a ghost. London was drowning in fog 3 nights later when Arthur Pendleton, the Duke of Rothmere, stepped out of his carriage in front of the Fairfax townhouse. He did not want to be here. In fact, there were 1,000 places he would rather be: his club, his country estate, or perhaps the House of Lords arguing over grain tariffs. But his aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Claridge, had insisted. "You are 32, Arthur," she had nagged him over tea. "You are the most eligible man in England, and you act like a monk. You need a wife. Baron Fairfax is hosting a masquerade. Go, if not for love, then to stop me from having a stroke." Arthur adjusted his black velvet domino mask. He was a man composed of sharp angles and cold authority. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and possessed a gaze that could silence a crowded room. They called him the Duke of Ice because he never smiled, never flirted, and certainly never let anyone see him bleed. He entered the ballroom, instantly bored. It was the same as always: overheated rooms, the smell of cheap perfume, and ambitious mothers pushing their daughters into his path. He took a glass of champagne and retreated to the edge of the room, hiding in the shadow of a large potted palm. From this vantage point, he could observe the predators and the prey. That was when he saw her. She wasn't dancing. She wasn't even on the floor. She was standing near the servants' entrance, half hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain. She wore a mask that covered the entire left side of her face, made of white lace. Her dress was an old-fashioned pale blue silk that had clearly been let out at the seams and was slightly faded. But it wasn't her dress that caught his attention. It was her stillness. Everyone else in the room was moving, laughing, posturing. She stood frozen, like a deer catching the scent of a wolf. Arthur watched as a man approached her. It was Lord Gillingham. Arthur knew Gillingham. He was a cheat at cards and a man Arthur had banned from his own clubs. He saw Gillingham lean in close to the woman. He saw the woman shrink back, her hands trembling so violently that the fan she held rattled against her skirts. Gillingham reached out and gripped her upper arm hard. His fingers dug into the flesh, creating a depression in the blue silk. This was not a lover's quarrel. This was ownership. Arthur felt a strange prickle of irritation. He despised bullies. He despised the way powerful men used their strength against those who could not fight back. Without fully understanding why, he set his glass down on a passing tray and began to move through the crowd. The crowd parted for him effortlessly. The Duke of Rothmere did not weave through people. People moved for the Duke. As he got closer, he could hear Gillingham's voice, low and slurred with drink. "Don't make a scene, Isolde," Gillingham hissed. "Your father has already spent the advance I gave him. You belong to me. Now, smile for the guests, or I'll take you out to the carriage right now and show you what a husband's rights entail." The woman, Isolde, looked up. Her eyes met Arthur's through the holes of her lace mask. Arthur stopped dead. He had expected to see tears. He had expected to see simple, missish fear. Instead, he saw a profound, hollow terror that hit him in the chest like a physical blow. It was the look of a soldier who knows the enemy is over the wall and he has no ammunition left. It was the look of someone accepting their own end. "Let her go, Gillingham." The voice was deep, resonant, and cut through the chatter of the nearby guests. Gillingham spun around, his face flushing red. "Rothmere, this is none of your business. A private family matter." "It becomes my business when you threaten a lady in public," Arthur said calmly. He stepped into the small alcove, towering over the older man. "Release her arm." "She is my betrothed," Gillingham spat, though he loosened his grip slightly. "Lady Isolde Fairfax, we are to be married, Monday." Arthur looked at Isolde. Up close, he could see the rigid tension in her neck, the way she held her breath. He noticed the white lace mask hid more than just her identity. It was contoured to hide a shape beneath it. "Is this true?" Arthur asked her. "Do you wish to marry this man?" Isolde looked at the tall, dark stranger. She didn't know who he was, but she saw the power radiating off him. He was terrifying in his own way, cold, severe, unyielding, but his eyes were clear. "No," she croaked. Her voice was raspy from crying. "Please." "He bought me." The crowd nearby had gone silent. The music seemed to fade away. Arthur's jaw tightened. "Bought you?" "A figure of speech," Gillingham blustered, sweating now. "A dowry arrangement. Standard practice. He paid my father £20,000, Isolde said, the words spilling out in a rush of desperate courage, "to cover gambling debts. And if I don't go, they will put me in the asylum." Arthur looked from the trembling woman to the sweating, repulsive lord. He made a decision in that split second, a decision that was reckless, insane, and completely unlike him. "She is not for sale," Arthur said coldly. "Excuse me," Gillingham laughed nervously. "The contract is signed." "Then the contract is void," Arthur declared. He reached out, his gloved hand taking Isolde's trembling hand from her side. He pulled her gently but firmly away from Gillingham and tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. "On what grounds?" Gillingham shrieked, drawing the attention of the entire ballroom. "By what right do you interfere, Rothmere?" Arthur looked down at Isolde. Her skin was ice cold. He looked back at Gillingham, raising his voice so the gallery could hear. "On the grounds that Lady Isolde is already spoken for." A collective gasp went through the room. Even Isolde looked up at him, shock replacing the fear. "Spoken for?" Gillingham sputtered. "By whom?" Arthur's eyes were hard as flint. "By me," Arthur lied smoothly. "Lady Isolde is under my protection, and if you ever touch her again, Gillingham, I will not just ban you from my clubs. I will see you destitute and exiled from England before the sun sets." He looked down at Isolde, squeezing her hand to silence her protest. "Come, my dear," he said, his voice dropping to a gentler register that no one in London had ever heard him use. "This air is toxic. Let me take you home." But he didn't take her to Fairfax Manor. He led her out into the cool London night, past her stunned stepmother, past the gaping guests, and lifted her into his own carriage with the ducal crest on the door. As the horses pulled away, leaving the scandal of the season in their wake, Isolde sat huddled in the corner of the plush velvet seat, shaking uncontrollably. Arthur sat opposite her, removing his mask. He watched her for a long moment. "You are safe now," he said, his voice returning to its usual cool detachments. "Safe?" Isolde let out a hysterical, broken laugh. She reached up and began to unpin the lace mask that hid her shame. "You don't understand, Your Grace. You haven't saved me. You've just stolen a monster." She pulled the mask away, revealing the angry, rippled scars that devoured the left side of her face. She waited for him to flinch. She waited for the look of disgust. Arthur didn't blink. He leaned forward, the carriage lamplight catching the sharp angles of his face. He looked not at the scar, but directly into her violet eyes. "I do not fear monsters, Lady Isolde," he whispered. "I have plenty of my own." The carriage ride to Rothmere House was a blur of cobblestones and gaslight, passed in a silence that was heavy with unsaid things. When the carriage finally rumbled to a halt, Isolde peered out the window. Rothmere House was not merely a residence. It was a fortress of grey stone standing imposing and aloof in the centre of Mayfair, much like its master. Footmen descended instantly, opening the doors. Arthur stepped out first, extending his hand. For a moment, Isolde hesitated. Taking his hand meant stepping out of the shadows of her old life and into a blinding, terrifying new world. But the alternative was Gillingham. She placed her trembling hand in Arthur's gloved one. Inside, the foyer was cavernous, checkered with black and white marble. A double staircase swept up either side, and a crystal chandelier the size of a carriage hung overhead. "Higgins," Arthur called out, his voice echoing. A severe-looking woman in black bombazine appeared from the shadows. She had a face like a crumpled map and sharp, intelligent eyes. "Your Grace?" "Prepare the blue suite," Arthur commanded, pulling off his gloves. "Lady Isolde will be staying with us." "Mrs." Higgins' eyebrows shot up, a seismic reaction for a woman of her stoicism. An unmarried woman staying in a bachelor duke's home was a scandal of the highest order. "The blue suite. Your Grace? Tonight? Immediately. And send for a physician. Lady Isolde is exhausted and—" Arthur glanced at the bruise beginning to darken on Isolde's jaw, a parting gift from her father earlier that day, "and injured." "I am fine," Isolde whispered, instinctually trying to make herself smaller. "Please, I don't wish to be a burden. If I could just sit in the kitchen until morning, I will find a way to leave." Arthur turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Leave? And go where, Lady Isolde? Back to the father who sold you? Or perhaps you'll wander the streets of London until the constables pick you up?" The harsh truth of his words stung, tears prickling her eyes again. "I don't know." "Then you will stay," Arthur said. "The command final." He turned back to the housekeeper. "Burn the clothes she is wearing, Higgins. Find something of my mother's in the attic trunks for the morning. And tea, strong tea, in the library. Now." An hour later, Isolde sat by a roaring fire in the Duke's library. The room was a masterpiece of mahogany and leather, smelling of tobacco and old vellum. She had been given a heavy wool shawl to wrap around her shivering shoulders. Arthur stood by the window, staring out at the rain. He had removed his formal tailcoat and stood in his waistcoat and shirt sleeves, looking less like a duke and more like a man bearing a heavy load. "Why?" Isolde asked into the silence. Arthur turned. "Why what? Why did you do it? You don't know me." "I am. Look at me." She gestured vaguely to her face. "I am the ghost of Sussex. My own family cannot stand the sight of me. Why would the Duke of Rothmere risk his reputation for a stranger?" Arthur walked over to the fireplace, leaning his arm against the mantel. The flames cast dancing shadows on his face. "My reputation is iron, Lady Isolde. It can withstand a dent or two. But as for why—" He paused, looking down at his hands. "I had a younger sister, Caroline." Isolde blinked. "I didn't know." "She died 10 years ago," Arthur said, his voice devoid of emotion, which somehow made it sadder. "She was married to a man like Gillingham, charming in public, a monster in private. I was young, traveling on the continent. I didn't see the signs until it was too late. She took her own life to escape him." Isolde gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I swore then," Arthur continued, his grey eyes locking onto hers, "that if I ever saw that look in a woman's eyes again, the look of a trapped animal, I would burn the world down to stop it. Tonight, I saw Caroline in you." The revelation hung in the air between them. He hadn't saved her because she was beautiful or special. He had saved her to save himself from the ghosts of his past. "But you cannot keep me here," Isolde said gently. "Gillingham will come. My father will come. The law is on their side. I am my father's property until I am a husband's property. That is the way of the world." "I am aware of the law," Arthur said dryly. He moved to his desk, picked up a piece of paper, and dipped a quill in ink. The scratching sound was the only noise in the room for a long minute. He stood up and handed her the paper. "What is this?" she asked. "A proposal," Arthur stated. Isolde read the ink, still wet and glistening. It was a formal request for a special license to marry. "Marry?" She dropped the paper as if it were hot coal. "You are mocking me." "I never mock, Lady Isolde. It is a waste of energy." He began to pace. "Think logically. You need protection. The only legal protection strong enough to negate your father's authority is a husband of higher rank. As a duke, I outrank everyone involved. But marriage?" Isolde stood up, her shawl slipping. "Your Grace, look at me. I am scarred. I am damaged. You are the most coveted man in England. You need a perfect duchess to host your balls and bear your heirs. You cannot marry the monster of Fairfax Manor." Arthur stopped pacing. He stepped close to her, intruding on her personal space, forcing her to look up at him. "I do not need a hostess. I detest parties. I do not need a beauty. Beauty fades and usually hides a vacuous mind. I need a wife who understands pain. I need a wife who will leave me in peace and not demand false declarations of love. And I need an heir to stop my cousin Silas from inheriting the title, as he is a fool." He reached out, his fingers brushing the hair away from her scarred cheek. Isolde flinched, closing her eyes, but he didn't pull away. "You have survived fire, Isolde," he said softly, using her given name for the first time. "You have survived 15 years of hatred in your own home. You are stronger than any debutante in London. I don't want a doll. I want a partner who can survive the storm. I am offering you a fortress. I am offering you my name. In exchange, you give me order and an heir. It is a business arrangement." Isolde opened her eyes. He was looking at her scar with a clinical, yet oddly respectful detachment. He didn't pity her. He respected her survival. "A marriage of convenience?" she whispered. "A marriage of protection," he corrected. "For both of us. They call me the Duke of Ice. I am not a warm man. Isolde, I cannot promise you romance, but I swear on my life, I will never raise a hand to you, and no one else will ever dare to hurt you again. Isolde looked at the paper on the desk. Then she thought of Gillingham's wet hands and her father's rage. She looked at Arthur, cold, distant, but safe, like a stone wall. If I say yes, she asked, what happens to Gillingham? Arthur's lips curled into a terrifyingly cold smile. Gillingham will learn what happens when a hyena tries to steal meat from a lion. The morning sun did not bring warmth. It brought the newspapers. By 9 a.m., the London Gazette had already sold out 2 printings. The headline was scandalous. The Duke and the Damaged. Rothmere steals Fairfax's daughter in midnight flight. Isolde sat in the breakfast room of Rothmere House, wearing a dress that had belonged to Arthur's mother. It was a deep emerald velvet, high-collared and long-sleeved. It fit her slender frame surprisingly well, though it belonged to a fashion from 20 years prior. She couldn't eat. The toast on her plate had gone cold. Across the long table, Arthur was reading the paper, his expression impassive. They are calling me a sorceress, Isolde murmured, reading a discarded sheet. They say I must have bewitched you, or that I am pregnant with your bastard. Let them talk, Arthur said, flipping a page. Sheep always bleat when the wolf passes by. Ignore it. It is easy for you to say, she countered, her voice trembling. You are the wolf. I am the mutton. Before Arthur could reply, the heavy doors of the breakfast room banged open. Mrs. Higgins looked flustered, a rare state for her. Your Grace, I tried to stop them, but Baron Fairfax and Lady Catherine stormed into the room, followed closely by a red-faced Lord Gillingham. 2 of Arthur's footmen were trying to block them, but the Baron was brandishing a cane like a weapon. Where is she? Fairfax roared. He spotted Isolde and lunged forward. You harlot! You ruin me! Isolde jumped up, knocking her chair over. She backed against the buffet table, clutching a butter knife instinctively. Arthur didn't stand up. He didn't shout. He simply folded his newspaper, set it down, and picked up his teacup. Sit down, Fairfax, Arthur said. The volume was low, but the command was absolute. You are muddying my carpets. I will not sit. The Baron was shaking with rage. You abducted my daughter. I have the constable outside. I'll have you arrested for kidnapping. She is a minor, Catherine shrieked, her porcelain face twisted in ugliness. She is mentally unfit. She belongs in our care. She is 23, Arthur corrected calmly, and as of this morning, she is not under your care. Lord Gillingham stepped forward, sneering. I have a contract, Rothmere, signed by her father. She is my betrothed. If you have touched her, I will sue you for damages to my property. Arthur finally stood. He rose to his full height, towering over the 3 intruders. He walked around the table, placing himself deliberately between them and Isolde. There is no betrothal, Arthur said, because the lady accepted a prior offer. Lies, Gillingham spat. No one would offer for that. He pointed a shaking finger at Isolde. I did, Arthur said, and she accepted. Show us proof, Lady Catherine demanded. You lie to cover your lust. Arthur reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded parchment. He tossed it onto the table. A special license, obtained from the Archbishop himself at dawn, and a marriage certificate, signed by the registrar an hour ago in my private chapel. The room went deathly silent. Isolde stared at Arthur's back. It wasn't true. They hadn't signed anything yet. The license was real. He had shown it to her last night, but the ceremony hadn't happened. He was bluffing. Fairfax snatched up the paper. His hands shook as he read it. The color drained from his face. Married? Fairfax whispered. You married her? She is the Duchess of Rothmere now, Arthur lied, with a smoothness that frightened Isolde. Which means, Baron, that you are speaking to a member of the peerage who outranks you significantly. I suggest you lower your voice. Lady Catherine's eyes narrowed. She wasn't looking at the papers. She was looking at Isolde. She was calculating. If she is married, Catherine said slowly, a poisonous smile forming, then the Kensington inheritance is released. Isolde felt a chill run down her spine. The inheritance. Ah, yes, Arthur said. I have my solicitors looking into that. The £20,000 her grandmother left her. It transfers to her husband upon marriage, does it not? It does, Gillingham snarled. Money that was promised to me. A pity, Arthur deadpanned. It seems the money now belongs to the Rothmere estate. Not that I need it. My daily income exceeds that sum. Perhaps I shall donate it to a charity for battered women." Lady Catherine looked as though she might scream. The plan had been perfect. Sell the stepdaughter, get the husband to pay the debts, and keep the inheritance in the family via Gillingham's kickbacks. Now, they had lost everything. "This isn't over," Gillingham hissed. "You may have the paper, Rothmere, but everyone knows the girl is mad. I have witnesses, servants who have seen her talking to walls, screaming at fire. If we prove she was insane at the time of the wedding, the marriage is annulled, and she goes to Bedlam." Arthur stepped closer to Gillingham. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "If you slander my wife," Arthur said softly, "I will destroy you. I will buy every debt you owe, Gillingham, every marker, every loan, and I will call them all in on the same day. You will die in a debtor's prison." He turned to the Baron. "And you. If you ever step foot on my property again, I will have the guards shoot to kill. Do I make myself clear?" The Baron gulped, nodding rapidly. He grabbed Catherine's arm. "Come, we are leaving." But Catherine started. "We are leaving?" Fairfax dragged his wife toward the door. Gillingham cast one last hateful look at Isolde, a look that promised retribution, and followed them out. When the doors closed, the silence returned, thick and suffocating. Isolde let out a breath she had been holding for minutes, her knees buckling. She slumped against the buffet table. Arthur turned to her. The mask of the Iron Duke slipped just a fraction. He looked tired. "Are you all right?" he asked. "You lied," she whispered. "We aren't married." "If they find out." "They won't," Arthur said, "because the chaplain is waiting in the chapel right now. We marry within the hour, before they can file any legal injunctions." Isolde looked up at him. "They want to prove I am mad. They will say I am unfit." "Are you?" Arthur asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. Isolde touched her scar. "Sometimes when I see fire, I panic. I hear my mother screaming. Sometimes I have nightmares so bad I wake up screaming myself. Does that make me mad, Arthur?" It was the first time she had used his name. Arthur crossed the room. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Panic is not madness, Isolde. It is memory. If that is madness, then I am mad too. I still hear the gunshot that killed my sister every time a door slams." He held out his hand again. "Come, let us make it true. Let us become the monster and the Ice King that they fear." The wedding was stark. No flowers, no music, no guests. Just Mrs. Higgins and the head footman as witnesses. The chapel was cold, smelling of incense and damp stone. Isolde's hand shook as she signed the register. Isolde Pendleton, Duchess of Rothmere. It was done. She was the wife of the most powerful man in England. She was safe, but as they walked out of the chapel, Arthur didn't kiss her. He didn't even hold her hand once the deed was done. He immediately shifted back into business mode. "I have hired a modiste," he said as they walked down the hall. "She arrives at noon. You will need a full wardrobe. We are attending the opera tomorrow night." Isolde stopped in her tracks. "The opera?" "Arthur, no, I cannot." "You can, and you will," he said, turning to face her. "We cannot hide. If we hide, Gillingham's rumors about your insanity will take root. We must be seen. We must show London that you are a duchess, not a madwoman locked in an attic." "But my face." "Wear the mask if you must," Arthur said, his voice firm but not unkind. "But wear diamonds with it. Hold your head up. If you act like a victim, they will treat you like one. If you act like a queen, they will bow." He looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "You are safe here, Isolde, but I cannot fight all your battles for you. You must learn to wield the shield I have given you." He turned and walked away toward his study, leaving her standing in the hallway. Isolde touched the cold gold ring on her finger. He was right. He had given her a shield his name, but he was a fortress with walls of ice. He had saved her life, but as she watched him walk away, she realized the hardest part would not be fighting society. The hardest part would be living with a man who had shut off his heart to the world, and realizing that she was the only one who might be able to find the key. And somewhere in the dark corners of London, Lord Gillingham was not giving up. He was meeting with a corrupt doctor from Bedlam, pouring a glass of whiskey, and plotting to turn the mad Duchess's nightmares into a reality she could never escape. The Royal Opera House in Covent Garden was a cavern of velvet, gold leaf, and judgment. It was the apex of London society, the place where reputations were minted or destroyed in the span of an overture. Isolde stood before the full-length mirror in her dressing room at Rothmere House, her breath catching in her throat. The modist Arthur had hired had worked miracles in 24 hours. Isolde wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that shimmered almost black in the low light, cut with a daringly low neckline that emphasized the creamy paleness of her throat, the only part of her skin that remained untouched by scars. But it was the mask that drew the eye. Arthur had commissioned it from a jeweler on Bond Street. It was not the flimsy lace she had worn at the ball. This was a structure of delicate silver filigree, shaped to cup the left side of her face like a lover's hand. It was encrusted with sapphires and diamonds that caught the gaslight and fractured it into 1,000 stars. It didn't hide the scar so much as armor it. It turned her wound into a weapon of beauty. "You look formidable, Your Grace," Mrs. Higgins said, adjusting the hem. It was the highest compliment the housekeeper could give. A knock came at the door. "Enter," Isolde said, her voice steadier than she felt. Arthur walked in. He was dressed in severe formal blacks, a stark contrast to the peacocks of society. He stopped when he saw her. For a fleeting second, the cool indifference in his eyes cracked. He didn't smile, but his gaze traveled from the hem of her gown to the silver mask, lingering there. "Do I look like a duchess?" Isolde asked, turning to him. "No," Arthur said, walking forward and offering his arm. "You look like a warrior queen, which is exactly what we need. The wolves are hungry tonight, Isolde." The arrival was a gauntlet. As Arthur led her up the grand staircase of the opera house, the chatter ceased. Hundreds of lorgnettes were raised. The whispers hissed through the air like steam escaping a pipe. "That's her, the burned one. Look at the mask. Is she hiding a face or a monster? They say he married her for the money. I heard she tried to burn down her father's house." Isolde felt her knees tremble. The air felt thin. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide in the shadows where she belonged. Arthur's grip on her arm tightened. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked straight ahead, his chin raised. "Breathe," he murmured, so low only she could hear. "They are not looking at you because you are ugly. They are looking at you because you are on the arm of the Duke of Rothmere. Do not give them the satisfaction of seeing you flinch." They reached their private box, the most prominent in the house. As they sat, Isolde felt exposed. Across the theatre, in the box opposite, she saw them. Baron Fairfax, Lady Catherine, and Lord Gillingham. They were staring. Catherine looked furious, her fan snapping back and forth, but Gillingham was smiling. He raised a glass of wine in a mock toast toward Isolde. Beside him sat a man Isolde did not know, a thin man with spectacles and a hairline that receded aggressively. He was taking notes in a small leather book. "Who is that man?" Isolde whispered, leaning toward Arthur. "With Gillingham?" Arthur peered across the distance. His jaw tightened. "That is Dr. Silas Blackwood. He is the head physician at the St. Jude's Asylum for the incurably insane." Isolde's blood ran cold. "Why is he here?" "Intimidation," Arthur said flatly. "Gillingham is trying to rattle you. He wants you to cause a scene. He wants Dr. Blackwood to witness the mad Duchess losing her composure." Arthur turned his chair so his back was to the stage, facing Isolde completely, blocking her view of the men. "Look at me, Isolde. Ignore them." "I can't," she whispered, her hands clutching her fan so hard the ivory creaked. "They are plotting. I can feel it." "Let them plot. We have the law. We have the money." "You don't understand," she hissed, panic rising in her chest. "Dr. Blackwood, my stepmother threatened me with him years ago. She said he can sign a committal paper without a judge if the family agrees. If they prove I am a danger to myself—" "You are not a danger," Arthur said firmly. "I will be if they push me." Her voice rose slightly, cracking. Suddenly, the curtain rose, and the music swelled, drowning out the murmurs of the crowd. But during the intermission, the war began in earnest. Arthur left the box to fetch refreshments, a tactical error, Isolde realized too late. Moments after he left, the curtain to her box was swept aside. It wasn't Arthur. It was Lady Catherine. She swept in, smelling of cloying rosewater. "Well," she sneered, looking down at Isolde, "you certainly look expensive, though you can't put polish on a rotten apple." "Get out," Isolde said, her voice shaking. "This is a private box. I am your mother," Catherine smiled, a rictus of malice. "I have a right to check on my poor, delirious daughter." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "We know about the nightmares, Isolde. We know you wake up screaming about fire. We know you talk to your dead mother." "I don't. Dr. Blackwood is very interested in your case," Catherine interrupted. "He calls it hysteria traumatica. He says the only cure is isolation, a dark room, cold water baths, no stimulation." Isolde pressed herself back into her chair. "Arthur won't let you." Catherine laughed softly. "Arthur? Do you think the Duke of Ice cares about you? He bought you for the Kensington coal mines, you stupid girl. Did he not tell you?" Isolde froze her. "Coal mines? Oh, you didn't know?" Catherine's eyes danced with glee. "The Kensington land in the north. It's sitting on the largest vein of anthracite in the county. Gillingham wanted it. But Rothmere, he's a businessman." He swooped in. "You are just a land deed with a pulse, my dear. Once he secures the mineral rights, he'll tire of playing nursemaid to a scar-faced cripple, and when he does, we'll be waiting." Catherine turned and swept out of the box, just as the lights flickered for the second act. When Arthur returned moments later with 2 glasses of lemonade, he found Isolde sitting rigid, her face pale as death beneath the silver mask. "What happened?" he demanded, setting the glasses down. "Is it true?" she asked, not looking at him. "The coal mines. Is that why you married me?" Arthur paused. He didn't flinch, and he didn't lie. "Yes," he said. "The Kensington estate has significant mineral resources. It was a factor in my decision." Isolde felt something break inside her chest, a fragile hope she hadn't realized she was holding. He had said it was a business arrangement. He had been honest. But to hear it confirmed, to know that her salvation was just a transaction for coal, made the sapphires on her face feel heavy as lead. "I see," she whispered. "Isolde," Arthur said, stepping closer. "It was a factor. It was not the only factor. I told you, I needed an heir and order. I needed to stop Gillingham. You stopped Gillingham to get the coal for yourself," she said dully. "You are just a better predator than he is." Arthur stiffened. The wall of ice slammed back down. "If that is what you wish to believe. But remember, Duchess, this predator is the only thing standing between you and Dr. Blackwood." He sat down and stared at the stage, his profile sharp and hard. Isolde sat beside him, surrounded by diamonds and velvet, feeling more alone than she ever had in her father's attic. The weeks following the opera were a study in cold civility. Arthur buried himself in work, spending his days with engineers, discussing the Kensington coal mines, leaving Isolde alone in the vast, echoing halls of Rothmere House. But she was not at peace. It started small, objects moved, windows opened. Then came the smells. On a Tuesday afternoon, Isolde smelled acrid smoke in the library. She ran into the hallway screaming fire, but the servants found nothing. The air was clear. Arthur's physician, Dr. Aris, suggested stress. Isolde saw the doubt in Arthur's eyes, a mirror of the judgment she feared from the world. 2 nights later, the terror escalated. Isolde was jolted awake by a scratching sound inside the wall behind her bed. "Scritch, scritch." "Isolde," the voice was a hollow whisper. "You burned me. You belong in the dark." Isolde clapped her hands over her ears, screaming. Arthur burst into the room moments later, pistol in hand, wearing his nightshirt. He found her backed into a corner, eyes wide with terror. "She's in the walls," Isolde sobbed. "My mother. She says I'm wicked." Arthur listened. Silence. Just the ticking clock. He went to her, gripping her wrists. "Isolde, there is no one here. It is a nightmare." "You don't believe me," she cried, pushing him away. "You think I'm mad like the rest of them. Go away. Go back to your coal mines." Arthur stood helpless as she curled up on the rug, weeping. He was a man of logic, and logic dictated his wife was losing her grip on reality. But as he turned to leave, a faint scent hit him. Not wood smoke, but something chemical, sulfur and phosphorus. He paused. His eyes scanned the room and landed on the ventilation grate near the floor. Next to it, on the pristine rug, was a smudge. He crouched down. It was black soot, in the shape of a man's boot print. A cold, terrifying fury washed over Arthur. This wasn't madness. This was theater. He stood up and yanked the bell pull. "I am calling the guard," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Someone is in my walls, Isolde, and I am going to skin them alive." An hour later, the household was assembled in the main hall. Arthur's security team dragged the head housemaid, Sarah, forward. She was clutching a heavy bag. Arthur upended the bag on the floor. Gold sovereigns spilled out more money than a maid could earn in a lifetime, along with a vial of phosphorus powder and a letter. "It is from Lord Gillingham," Arthur announced, holding up the letter. "Scripts for what to whisper, instructions on when to pump smoke into the vents." Isolde stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. She looked at the sobbing maid, then at Arthur. "I wasn't mad," she whispered. "No," Arthur said, crossing the room to take her face in his hands. The ice was gone from his eyes. They burned with a fierce protectiveness. "You were being tortured, and I let it happen because I doubted you. Forgive me." Isolde looked at him, seeing not the cold duke, but a partner. "What do we do now?" "Now," Arthur said, lacing his fingers with hers, "we finish this. Gillingham has attacked my home and my wife. He has declared war." He turned to the window, looking north. "Tomorrow, we are not going to the opera. We are going to the Kensington mines, and we are going to invite Lord Gillingham to meet us there." "Why?" Isolde asked. Arthur smiled, a sharp, terrifying expression. "Because accidents happen in mines, my love, especially to men who play with fire." The Kensington mine was a scar on the Yorkshire landscape, a place of black coal dust and screaming steam engines. Arthur and Isolde stepped out of their carriage to meet Lord Gillingham and a nervous Baron Fairfax near the pithead. "I thought you were a man who held on to his possessions." "Rothmere," Gillingham sneered, eyeing the surveys tucked under the foreman's arm. "This asset has proven troublesome." Arthur lied smoothly, guiding Isolde forward. "I prefer cash. The papers are in the lower office. We must inspect the vein before signing." Greed overcame Gillingham's suspicion. He followed them into the iron cage, and they plunged 600 feet into the earth. When the cage opened, the air was thick with heat and sulfur. The foreman, MacGregor, waited in the shadows, along with 2 constables. "Where are the deeds?" Gillingham demanded. Arthur didn't produce a deed. He produced a crumpled letter. "We aren't here to sell, Gillingham. We are here to witness." He held up the confession from the maid, Sarah. "This details everything. The gaslighting, the phosphorus powder, the bribery. And we have your valet's testimony to match." "It's a forgery," Fairfax shrieked, backing away. "It is a warrant," Arthur corrected. "Constables, arrest him." Cornered and desperate, Gillingham's face twisted into a mask of rage. "You think you can take me?" he roared. He grabbed a heavy iron pry bar leaning against the wall and swung it wildly, not at Arthur, but at the main timber support beam. "If I go down, I take the mine with me." The iron struck wood with a sickening crack. The tunnel groaned. Arthur lunged to stop him, but the roof gave way. A massive slab of shale thundered down, separating the group in a cloud of choking dust. Isolde was thrown back, coughing in the darkness. "Arthur, back! Stay back!" MacGregor shouted, pulling her away from the wall of rubble. "The roof is unstable." "Where is my husband?" Isolde screamed. "Trapped on the other side," MacGregor said grimly. "With Gillingham." Isolde grabbed a lantern. Through a small gap near the floor, she heard a faint groan. The hole was too small for the foreman, but not for her. "I'm going in," she said. "It's suicide," MacGregor warned. "It's my husband." Isolde dropped to her stomach and crawled into the suffocating dark. The rock scraped her back, pressing down like the weight of the world. Panic flared, the old fear of the dark, of the fire, but she shoved it down. She found Arthur half buried under a pile of shale, his leg pinned by a beam. Gillingham lay nearby, crushed and silent. "Isolde?" Arthur rasped, his face grey with pain. "Go back. Shut up and push," she grunted, jamming her shoulder under the beam. She channeled every ounce of strength the fire had left her. With a scream of effort, she leveraged the timber just enough for Arthur to pull his leg free. But the movement destabilized the roof. Another crash buried them deeper, sealing the exit completely. Silence fell. They were trapped in the dark. "We are going to die here," Isolde whispered, curling into his arms. "Perhaps," Arthur said softly, his hand tracing the line of her mask. "For 10 years, I was dead, Isolde. A ghost in an empty house. But you woke me up. I don't want the coal. I just want you." "You love me?" she asked, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "I love you," he answered. "I love your fire." Isolde buried her face in his neck. "I love you too. Now, let's not die." Above them, the rhythmic clang, clang, clang of pickaxes broke the silence. The rescue had begun. 2 years later, the summer ball at Rothmere House was the event of the season. Isolde stood at the top of the grand staircase, wearing a gown of shimmering gold. She wore no mask. The scar on her face was visible, bathed in the warm light of the chandelier, but she held her head high. The crowd below didn't stare with pity, they looked on with awe. Waiting at the bottom of the stairs was Arthur, holding their infant son, Leo. As she descended, Arthur's eyes were full of warmth. The Duke of Ice had melted long ago. "You are late, my love," he smiled, offering his arm. "I was busy firing the landscape architect," she teased, kissing him. They walked onto the dance floor, the undisputed heart of London society. Above the fireplace hung a new portrait. It depicted Arthur and Isolde on the moors, Isolde holding her mask in her hand, her face bare and triumphant. The plaque beneath read simply, "Isolde, the woman who walked through fire." She was no longer the ghost of Sussex. She was the Duchess of Rothmere, and she was finally, completely seen. And that is the story of Lady Isolde and the Duke of Rothmere. A story that reminds us that our scars do not define our worth, and that even the coldest hearts can be thawed by the right fire. If you enjoyed this story of redemption and romance, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. Share this with a friend who needs a happy ending, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. I have a heartbreaking Victorian mystery coming next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep believing in love.